Hello and welcome to my deep guide and the Big Boox guide. The tablet itself holds a lot of options, but they can be actually sometimes hidden, difficult to find. So the aim of this entire guide and the playlist is to help you get the maximum out of your device. Here is my trusty old Nova 2. So I'm going to be doing the initial setup and the things that you need to do or that are advisable to do for the very first time when you start up your Boox device, whichever it may be. Of course, you first start it up, choose your language that you prefer, and then just follow along the steps. This one is actually important to set up, and I'm going to be talking about this a little bit later, and I'm going to be showing you where to find and adjust the power settings. For now, I'm going to leave it at default. And this step is quite important because you're going to be doing the first initial calibration of your pen. You can choose between the right-handed or the left-handed mode, or you can skip the calibration and do it later as well. So that's also a possibility. However, what's important to take into consideration here is that the calibration should be done with the pen that you'll be using on this device. So once you calibrate the pen, for example, with the original Boox pen, and then you switch over to something else. I'm using, for example, the Samsung S6 pen. Then it's very, very highly recommended to recalibrate the pen or the stylus itself, just to be able to actually get the best results. The calibration is simple. You just need to tap into the axis, but don't tap anywhere. Try to tap precisely into the X itself, how you would normally use your pen, and try to be consistent. So just tapping around, it will probably just say like, yeah, it's configured and all that kind of stuff, but you will get better results more precise you are tapping in that center of those axes. And there we go. So now we have our first startup, and I'm using, currently the version is OS version 3. So there are some features that are going to be available on the most modern devices like Note 3, Note Air, Max Lumi, and Nova 3. For example, screencast. That is something that only Android 10 devices will have. Nova 2, Note 2, Max 3, they all remain on Android 9. And while they've gotten like 99% of the upgrades from version 3, unfortunately screencasting is not one of them. So that's the reason why you won't see it here. And that's something that's a definite benefit between newer generation of devices and the older generation of devices. So let's talk about the home screen. We got the work area on the centerpiece, we got the notifications tab, and we have the different modes toolbar on the left hand side. This is where you can switch between library, store, notes, storage, apps, and settings. If you slide down, so you start from outside of the screen and you just slide down from the notifications bar or notifications area and you pull it down, this is where you get system-wide tools, so to speak, and they are divided into a couple of sections. The first one is the main one, and this is going to give you shortcuts to most important operations such as back, home, multi-app switching, so you can switch between different apps and multitasking, and screen refresh. Now, these, since version 3, can be actually customized to be as gestures, which we will talk about a little bit later in this video. However, you have these shortcuts very accessible here as well. Now, at this point, it's also noteworthy that the devices that do have a physical button, by default, it will default as and function as a back button, like on most Android devices. However, you do have an option in the settings to turn the back button to function as a home as well. Then we have shortcuts for the notification bar and for functions that are system-wide, such as enable, disable Wi-Fi, toggle the rotation, Bluetooth, screen refresh speeds. We can switch between normal, speed mode, and all this kind of stuff, something we'll talk about, contrast, split screen, and the edit button. Now, the edit button is actually important because it allows you to add a couple of things and customize these things. So the top row here represents the icons that I'm using in my top bar, and the bottom row are the icons that are not yet assigned. So I can actually change these things quite easily. Now, one of the first things that I always do is basically I click and hold my navigation ball, and then just simply drag it up into here. I'm going to put it at the end. So there, and then I release it because I want to add it to the screen. Feedback and finger touch enabled. Finger touch can be helpful, but it's very easily accessible in most of the app modes that you're in, so for me that's fine. But if you're interested, this is where you'll find it. Now, why do I actually add the navigation ball? Especially on the smaller screen formats. While the navigation ball is very helpful and you do have this docking option, which is totally fine, there are situations where you maybe don't want to have that navigation ball at all. And in those cases, then it's extremely handy to simply turn it off or on. Very, very accessible at any given point and in any mode that you are in. So that's one of the first things that I do on the initial setup. Underneath the function shortcuts, we have the brightness control, and the brightness control controls the cold light at the bottom. Of course, you can turn them off by sliding the intensity sliders all the way off, or you can use the turn off on buttons here. So we have the warm light, then we have the cold light. You can link them together so that you can just slide one of them. One of the things that you cannot do is link them together in an established relationship. So let's say, for example, that I would like this kind of ratio, but less intensity or more intensity. As soon as I link them and I start moving, they will snap to the highest value. So that's something that, is a limitation and that you should be aware of. And of course, you can toggle the light off or back on using these switches, and then it goes back to the previously adjusted settings. The settings that I typically use on my front light are very, very low. So usually I use as little as possible of the blue light and a little bit of the orange light as well, just to tint the screen so that when I'm in a darker conditions that it kind of lights it up a tiny little bit. Now, this, of course, you can do whatever you want, but be aware that increasing the intensity of the front light will increase the battery consumption. So there's a very direct correlation between these two. So unless you need to actually have it glowing into your face, consider keeping it at a lower intensity. And at the very bottom, we have the notifications, alarms, and the sound options of the tablet itself. When I usually get a new tablet, Boox tablet, and I start setting it up, this is probably the very first thing that I do, even before adding the navigation ball toggle button here. I always go, the very first thing I do is I go to this menu here to turn on the do not disturb mode. One of the things that I really love about the Remarkable platform and about the SuperNote is that they are not media oriented devices, and therefore they are distraction free devices. I do value that quite a lot, and by default Boox devices are not that. They are the opposite. They are an Android tablet. In this case, Nova 2 does not have a speaker, but Nova 3 does, and most of the other devices actually do have speakers, and by now it would have already plinged and dinged and would do some things that I really, really dislike. For me, enabling and setting up this tablet to be a distraction-free type of a tablet is one of the highest priorities that I do. If that's something that you would like, slide down and then you go to this button here, the little settings button here next to the volume. You click on it, and that's a shortcut for the sound settings. Now in the sound settings, we have this one that's important, do not disturb. By default, it's off. So we want to turn this on now. And the duration here, until you turn off. So you do not want it to be turned off automatically or anything like that. And you can also set up the behavior of the do not disturb mode. So by default, it's muted, but allow alarms and media. So I go even further and I say no media. Alarm you can keep if you want, because, why not use the Boox device as an alarm clock as well. I do not want any visual or sound from the notifications, so you don't see them or hear them. Now keep in mind that this means that you won't get notifications when you get a new post, a new email, or anything like that. That is the whole point of it, that you check your email, that you check these things so that you're not distracted by notifications. The rest really doesn't matter except for the duration button, which is quite important. I want the do not disturb mode to be constantly on until I specifically decide to turn it off. Once you do this, you will notice a new icon has appeared. This one, circle with a little dash in the middle. And that is an indication that the do not disturb mode is on. You could also tap on the icon on the left side to mute the device as well. That's an overkill because the do not disturb mode is doing that, but some applications do tend to try and override the do not disturb mode, even though they shouldn't. So that's a good idea to actually mute the device as well. And now your Boox device is distraction free. Now the next thing that I usually set up on my new device is the power plan setup and behavior, something that I mentioned in the initial setup. So let's go to the settings, and then you can go to power section here. So once I'm in the power section, I want to check out a couple of things and set up a couple of things. The first one is the auto sleep. So after 5 minutes of inactivity, it goes to sleep. That's fine. I'm okay with that. That's not a problem. Power off timeout, that's something that I usually set up to 12 hours. And there's a reason why I do this. So if it turns off every 15 minutes, the power on cycle is actually quite lengthy, and it does take a little bit of time. So it can become a little bit annoying if you have to start up the device every 15 minutes. Now also, the power up itself does consume quite a bit of energy. The use case of these scenarios is reading, writing, taking notes, or being on classes or things like that. So you want the device to be ready, that you flip it open and you just start writing. And that's something that you won't have if you have the power off timeout on 15 minutes. So to avoid that, I was experimenting with a lot of things, and I settled down on 12 hours because when I start my day, I power it up for the first time when you start your workday. That's not a problem because you power on the device and that's it. And it then stays on for at least 12 hours until the last time it went to sleep. So for example, if you're done with your work at around 6 o'clock, it will power off at 6 o'clock next morning. So it really is a balance that actually works well for me. It's something that you should check out which balance actually works best for your case scenario. But for me, the 12 hours is the best compromise between unnecessary battery consumption and the readiness of the device. Because if you keep it like that, in 99% of the cases when you need the device, it will simply be powering on as soon as you open up the flipbook cover, and that's exactly what you want. This is also a place where you can set up a couple of really interesting things that you might not be aware of, such as that you can have network timeout inactivity. So that means that if you wanted, you can set up the option that if there is no network activity for 5 minutes, it will automatically shut the Wi-Fi off. Battery status is something where you will actually see the report of what's using your battery the most. This is useful when, for example, if you notice that your battery is draining more quickly than you would expect it to. So you can go here and then you can see a listing of which processes, which apps, and which parts of the device are using the battery most, and it's a good way to actually troubleshoot and find the culprit. It is also possible to disable the finger touch from here. You can enable or disable the battery percentage here to kind of save up some more space. Auto sleep detection for the flipbook cover is also here, and you also have an option of automatically turning Wi-Fi on when the device boots up, if that's what you want. By default it's off, and I would recommend it to be off, but if that's your requirement, this is where you can actually do this. And finally, you can also disable the power button, the physical power button here on top, that it doesn't function as a power button, but actually to switch to standby for accidental bumps. If it's in the bag or something and you accidentally lean the device here so that the power button presses, that it doesn't turn off, but it actually goes into sleep mode. All right, we're starting to make our Boox tablets our own. We've turned on the do not disturb mode on, set up how it's going to behave, set up our power plan. The next thing that I usually set up is a security pin. So just to kind of have a password for the screen lock. So let's go to settings. Then you can go to more settings, and now we have the first thing is the password, and we have screen lock password setting. Now On the devices that actually have a fingerprint reader enabled, this is also where you will be able to set up your fingerprint unlocking or locking kind of thing. Currently, there's no way to restore your password unless you log into the Onyx account. So you can enter your password, but just be aware that unless you log into the Onyx account, you cannot reset it. So just be aware of that. So now let's enter something absolutely spectacular, such as 1111, and then confirm it, 1111, and then say OK. So we've set our password successfully, and now if we go to standby, and then we wake up again, we should be greeted by the password. So you have to go 1111, and done. And there you go. And now your device is protected and unlocked. So this is where you set it up. Just be aware that you do have to be logged into the Onyx account in order to reset the password. Now I can remove the password if I want to. And there we go. Now we are actually done. So we should be able to go to sleep and wake up without a password. Now the next one for me is quite important because a lot of users actually miss that, and this is a new addition since version 3, and this is the gesture support. Now the gestures are 3 gestures that you can, the same way that you can swipe the notifications bar down, we have an option, or up, we have an option of swiping from down to up in these 3 columns, for example. So you can just monitor these if you wanted to visualize them. So you have the left one, center one, and the right one. And the gesture of swiping up, left, center, and right can be customized, but it needs to be enabled. It's not enabled by default. In order to enable it, you go to Settings, More Settings, and then we have this section here, Gesture Manager. And there we go. So we have our left, center, and back. And first thing you need to do is to enable it. Now when it's enabled, these gestures will work. And furthermore, you can actually customize them to do different things. So what I usually do is I have here, on the left one, I put a full screen refresh so that I can just simply go whoop when reading and refresh the page. Cool. So now I have that set up. Middle one I keep as back home, and the right one I keep as back. So effectively with the gesture manager, you kind of replace 3 of the 4 icons that you have. So the one that I use the least is the multitasking app switch button. So I keep it there. So when I do need it, I don't find it a problem to have 2 gestures, as in swipe down and tap. But the home button, back, and refresh I use all the time, and it's very, very convenient to have them as gestures. So now when I just swipe up from the middle, I have gone home, and I can do a full screen refresh, and the back would work. There we go. And the back works when swiping from here. So that's how you enable and customize your gestures on the Boox device. By default, your home is going to be your library. But for me, for example, I do quite a lot of writing on my Boox devices, and I would like it to be the notes, for example. So that is possible to customize. Again, we go to Settings, More Settings, and then we have this option, Custom Homepage. If I tap on it, I can choose between these options. So I can choose my home function to take me to library, store, notes, storage, apps, or settings. In my case, I'm using notes. This is of course going to be different for anyone's case. But yeah, that's basically what I want. Now here's a little trick that somebody asked me. They noticed that I have these icons in a different order than the default order. And yeah, I do, because I don't actually like the default order. And this is where you go to do that, in the custom homepage setting, because as the tip says, long press and drag list to sort. So for example, if I wanted to, I can go and keep on notes. Once it flashes, I can reorder it where I want. So maybe I want to have my library and then my notes, and you can see that it's switched. The store, I don't really use that much, so I'm just going to push it further underneath, and I would like to have storage option under notes. There we go. And then I have my apps and my settings. So now I've reordered the icons here to my liking. Great. And one last thing that I always do is that while it's nice that I have the typed text that describes which icon does what, I've used Boox platforms for a while now and I know what they are. So once you actually get used to it, you have this option here. Again, it's in the same place in settings, more settings, and at the very bottom you have this checkbox function tabs display icons only, which means when I click it, the text underneath the icons is gone, and now we have a much cleaner overview of our device. So if you're not still comfortable and you don't know which icon does what, I recommend that you keep this option on, but shortly you will get used to which icon is doing what, which is the ordering, and then it's a very nice thing to actually just get rid of it and have a little bit of a cleaner UI. And finally, the last thing that I would do, for that you would actually need to hook up to a Wi-Fi, is to double check the firmware update. So you go to settings and then you go to firmware update to double check if you are using the latest update or not. I always recommend updating to the latest update because they always bring fixes, improvements, and all this kind of good stuff. Incidentally, if you do not want your device to actually check the update package automatically, that you want to check it out manually, you can turn it off here. If you're looking for the user manual, it's in the settings. So you go to settings and then the very first thing here is the information about your tablet, which Android version it's using and all that kind of stuff. And of course the user manual itself. Now, far more importantly, because user manual is a little bit confounded and the translation is not the best. That's one of the reasons why I'm actually doing the series of videos. So you can forget about that. But this little arrow here, that one's important because that's a super hidden option for the additional information and, more importantly, factory reset. So if you are going to do factory reset of your device, you go to settings, you tap on the little arrow to the right of the user manual, and this is where you actually have your factory reset option. Now, there's only a couple more things that I usually do as an initial setup, and they are also in settings, but this time we go to applications. It's very, very tricky to actually find it because for me it doesn't really make too much sense to be in applications, but that's where it is. And the two things are, I do not use this library and I don't think that it does have a good selection, but it's on by default and I do believe that it communicates in the background by default. I don't want to use the Bookstore, there are much better options, and by default it is on. However, if you do go to settings and applications, you have the option of enable Bookstore. By default, it's enabled. I'm going to disable it. Now, this is not going to remove it, so you cannot remove the option, but you can at least disable it. And that's what I've done. And the final thing is that, you remember when I talked that the back button can be changed to function as a home button? Well, this is where you do it. In the settings, applications, you can have the set back button as home button. And now when I do it like this, I'm back home, like a gesture. But for me, this button really doesn't make too much sense since they've added the gestures, so I really don't care. I kind of leave it as it is, as a back button, since I'm using the gestures anyway for my needs. But should you need it, that's where you can set it up. Alright, and now we've done the initial setup of our Boox device. So let's recap what was done. The very first thing that we did was turn on and set up the Do Not Disturb mode on our tablet. We adjusted our front light settings. We adjusted our top bar settings here to include the navigation ball toggle. Then we went to settings and we adjusted our power plan, our security settings. We enabled gesture detection and customized it to our liking. We set up a custom homepage. We've rearranged our icons here on the side to better suit our needs. And we've removed the text underneath them so that they are more clean. And we've checked if the device needed the update of a firmware. And we've disabled the Bookstore because we don't need it to do unnecessary stuff in the background. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you've learned something new. If you did, please subscribe and like the video and ding the notification bell thingy to get notified when the new videos are coming out and when the new Big Boox guide chapters are coming out, because they will be coming. There's lots more coming. Also, be sure to check back regularly on the Big Boox playlist so that you can, browse the content and find the answer that you might be looking for there. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you in the next video. Bye!